All right, friends. What we're going to talk about is the Baha'i faith. But what particularly we're going to talk about is the central tablet in this book, Summons of the Lord of the Host, which is the Súrih Haykal, or the tablet, or the surah of the temple. And in particular, we're going to talk about the symbolism of this tablet, because the very title itself is a symbol. Because the word temple, even though it is understood to mean the human temple or body, also has the double entendre or symbolic meaning of a place where God dwells, or God can be accessed. And so we go into a temple to worship, and yet our human temple is also the place through which our soul, in its initial stages of development, expresses itself and learns and develops. So I hope you'll find this interesting, because where we're going to end up with is in the cluster. We're going to see how all of this relates to the cluster, in particular the word temple and its symbolism. During the last years of his ministry, Baha'u'llah himself arranged for the publication for the first time of definitive versions of some of his principal works, and the Súrih Haykal was awarded a prominent position among them. That's in the introduction to this book, The Summons of the Lord of Hosts. And this talk will be taken from works, a discussion that I have in a book that's coming out in the spring with the Publishing Trust, called The Face of God Among Us, which will be a rather lengthy discussion of exactly who and what a prophet is, what powers they have, what methodology they use in educating. I'm going to have a little brief introduction before we get into the three parts of this symbolism of this work, which is incredibly important. And you'll see, whenever you see it discussed, that it is a difficult tablet, but a very important tablet. The basic symbols are pretty obvious and upfront, as I say. First of all, the symbol of the pentacle is a symbol of the human body, because it has two legs, two arms, and a head, even though they're pointy. The temple, as I've said, the physical edifice of the human body, and then the temple of the manifestation, which is alluding to the body of the prophet. Why is that important? Well, that's pretty much all that's talked about in this tablet, the Surah of the Temple, is the construction of the body that the prophet will use in order to teach us. That sounds complicated, but we'll get to it and I'll hopefully clear it up. The temple of the manifestation is also symbolizing the institution. The body of the prophet in this sense is the institution he creates. So for example, if you're talking to any Catholic or Christian about the body of Christ, you're talking about what? Church. The church. You're talking about the institution. The same thing is true for us. In one symbolic sense, the temple of the manifestation is the institution he's created, by which we receive God's information and by which we worship God and gain access to the presence of God, which is not literally the presence of God, but the presence of God as manifested, acted out through the prophet. Everything the manifestation does and says has some bearing on his representation of God in human form. Building the temple then also refers to constructing then the evolving institution that the prophet has left for us, that we might give guidance to the whole world. So those are the major symbols, the basic symbols you need to understand up front. We'll get back to them, but it's simple enough. Now, this is just a way of seeing how this works. You can see that you have the pentacle representing the Haykal, the temple, representing the human body. Now, before we get into more symbolism, you need to understand the historical context. One of the things that was so wonderful about the work that Adib Tahirzadeh did in his 4-volume study of the revelation of Baha'u'llah was that he gave the historical context in which each of the works that were revealed were revealed. So there is a shape to the revelation of Baha'u'llah. It's not just he wrote a whole bunch of stuff. There's a beginning, a middle, a climax, and an end to his ministry. All right? And this work comes at a very important position. That is this particular tablet. The supreme crisis, this is from God Passes By, the supreme crisis Baha'u'llah himself designated is the Yam-i Shirar, the days of stress, during which the most grievous veil was torn asunder and the most great separation was irrevocably effected. It immensely gratified and emboldened its external enemies, both civil and ecclesiastical, played into their hands and evoked their unconcealed derision. It perplexed and confused the friends and supporters of Baha'u'llah and seriously damaged the prestige of the faith in the eyes of its Western admirers. Who can tell me what that event is and when it occurred? The days of stress. Anybody know? Nobody knows? Okay, that's all right. That means you're here to learn something. Yes?
The Great Separation.
And what was the Great Separation and when and where?
Azal and Baha'u'llah.
Pardon?
Azal and Baha'u'llah.
When?
About 1866.
Very good. And where?
Adrianople.
Good. He's exactly right on every point. And now remember this. Baha'u'llah concealed himself at the request of the Bab for 10 years. So even though he knew he was ready to begin his ministry in the Siyah-Chál from 1852, December of 1852, for 4 months thereafter. So he sees the veiled maiden and is the symbol to begin is revealed to him, and it's important that we understand he already knows he's a prophet, of course. We know this, he knew that, Tahireh and Khodus knew this, the Bab knew this too. But he hadn't revealed it to anyone, and the Bab said, please withhold revealing yourself for 10 years, until the year 19, right? As a token to those who love me, because the Bab foreknew that all of his leadership would be killed, the faith would be in disarray, Súrih would be a covenant breaker, and so on. And so Baha'u'llah doesn't tell the people until 1863, after he's revealed the Igan, and the same day that he receives the exile orders that the governor finally, after 3 tries to resist, gives Baha'u'llah, saying he's going to be exiled to Constantinople, and then, of course, a few months later to Adrianople. So, the days of stress, the Rizwan, then, announcement, is the announcement to his friends who were there with him in Baghdad. But the announcement he gives officially is at this time, in about 1866, after the rebellion, which was about a year after they were in Adrianople, and Mirza Yahya starts stirring up all kinds of trouble. I don't have time to go into the details. You've got the same literature I do. You can read about it. Very interesting period. But there comes a point where Baha'u'llah says, enough accommodation of this rebel, and he refuses to see anybody for several months, divides his furniture in half, even though it's all his, but as a token, as a symbolic act, gives half to Mirza Yahya, to Súrih, and keeps half for himself, and in effect forces those among his followers to choose whom they will follow. And some follow Mirza Yahya, and some follow Baha'u'llah. From that point on, they are called Baha'is, followers of Baha. Even though he's had the name Baha for some time, they have still called themselves Babís. And the followers of Mirza Yahya are referred to as the people of the Bayán. Now, we refer to them as Azalis and so on. But they are referred to in the literature of Baha'u'llah after that point and in this book as the people of the Bayán, and it is them to whom this tablet is initially addressed, the people of the Bayán, the Babís who have not yet recognized Baha'u'llah. And that explains a lot to you about the tone of it and so on. Now, the work was then recomposed or rearranged in the Akka period, and that is the tablet that is the Súrih Haykal, the tablet of the temple, the surah of the temple, was then combined with 5 of the representative letters to the rulers of the world. So in other words, in Baghdad, before he leaves, he announces who he is to his close friends. In Adrianople, with this tablet, he announces officially, follow me, follow Mirza Yahya, you can't do both. I separate myself from this half-brother of mine. All right? And so officially they are called Baha'is now. And then he immediately begins to do what? What is the next stage in this progress of his revelation? What does he do? Writes to the, thank you, Ingrid, there you are. You're not Gertrude anymore. I always call her Gertrude, and she always is happy with that. He writes to the kings and rulers of the world, announcing to them who he is. You know, so when people say, why doesn't anybody know about the Baha'i faith? Well, Baha'u'llah did not conceal himself. He announced it to his close followers, then officially, and then to everybody else in the world. So when the work is then reassembled, so that it was the work that was published, as we saw earlier, it was assembled as a pentahangle, and the structure of it is the original tablet revealed in Adrianople, plus included the letters to Pope Pius, Napoleon, Tsar Alexander, Queen Victoria, and Nasiruddin Shah. And then there's a brief paragraph at the end that's important, strategically we'll look at. That's Baha'u'llah's conclusion. So that's what becomes of the version that is shaped sort of like that. Now this is, we don't have a copy of the, or at least I don't, of the way he had it arranged into a pentangle, but this is how the Bab arranged the pentangle of the 350 derivatives of the word Baha. Obviously has great symbolic meaning there. So we can presume that, I don't know that this is how it's arranged physically. I haven't done that much research on it yet. But in other words, you have the surah of the temple itself and then the representative letters announcing. So he's announcing here to the people of the Bayán, those, why do you think he calls them the people of the Bayán? They were still following the Bayán, and the Bab had said very specifically, those who are following me in the days of him whom God will make manifest are not following me because I'm telling you to follow him. And so the tone when he uses this term, people of the Bayán, is derisive. He's putting them down. All right? You're still the people of the Bayán, but here I am. So that's the introduction. Now here we come to the 3 parts of the talk, okay? Explaining the epiphany of the prophet. This is one of my hobby horses as a Baha'i scholar, and that is one of my major things I like to get cleared away right up front. It has to do with the fact that there's a great misunderstanding that is even somewhat promulgated or perpetuated in Rui books 2 and 4 that seem to imply that in the Siyah-Chál, when he writes to Nasiruddin Shah, and this is included in his final version of the Surah of the Temple, O king, I was but a man like others, asleep upon my couch, When lo, the breezes of the all-glorious were wafted over me and taught me the knowledge of all that hath been. This thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing. And he bade me lift up my voice between earth and heaven, and for this there befell me what hath caused the tears of every man of understanding to flow. Now, if you take this literally, it means he didn't know he was a manifestation. Suddenly he was transformed from an ordinary human being, sleeping on his couch, and poof, he's a manifestation. This is not true. This is improper, and it doesn't even mean that he suddenly became aware he was a manifestation. All right? First of all, how many couches were there in the black pit? None. So that should cause you to prick up your ears right away. All right? And he's not a man like others. So what does this mean? This is not a literal description. There is an authoritative interpretation of this tablet and of this passage in particular in Some Answered Questions by Abdul-Bahá. And he says, first of all, the state of manifestation is not sensible, that this is a state of manifestation. It's not sensible, meaning it's not a literal thing he's talking about. It is an intellectual reality, exempt and freed from time, from past, present, and future. It is an explanation, a simile, a metaphor, and is not to be accepted literally. So don't accept it literally. All right? So if someone says, Baha'u'llah became a manifestation, no, he was a manifestation from birth. They all are. He didn't know he's a manifestation. Yes, they do. They know it from birth. How do we know? Because right here, Abdul-Bahá in this same discussion says, the holy manifestations have ever been and ever will be luminous realities. No change or variation takes place in their essence. Before declaring their manifestation, they are silent and quiet like a sleeper. And after their manifestation, they speak or are illumined like one who is awake. There you go. Don't take it literally. Why? Because it's not literal. Before that, he says, sleeping and waking is passing from one state to another. Now, this really makes it clear. Sleeping is the condition of repose, and wakefulness is the condition of movement. Sleeping is the state of silence, wakefulness is the state of speech. Sleeping is a state of mystery, wakefulness the state of manifestation. So they speak and are illumined like one who is awake. Now, something else you need to know. Not only is the manifestation aware of his condition, both before declaring his mission and before they have this epiphany that they all seem to have, which seems to be a signal that now is the time to begin. All right? So, no, in my book, I compare it to a runner who's in the Olympics, or is going to be in the Olympics. The runner trains for 4 years. The runner knows he's going to be in the Olympics. The runner is in really good shape. The runner knows he's a good runner. But still, when he's up there on the starting line, ready for the gun to go off, there's a lot of excitement. And when the gun goes off and the signal to begin sounds, you can imagine that all kinds of emotional and experiences take place. That's probably one way we can get a little idea of what he is describing. That it's one thing to know you're going to be doing this. It's something else when the process itself begins. I don't know if that's an accurate analogy, but it's one that helps me a little bit. Obviously, we can only vaguely understand these beings who are not ordinary human beings. How do we know? Because we know, first of all, that they choose what they will be while they pre-exist. Because, as the Guardian says, unlike us, they pre-exist in the world of the spirit. We don't have pre-existence. We begin at conception. They already exist from time immemorial. So, this is a quote from The Advent of Divine Justice. In discussing the post-incarnate station of Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi notes that the manifestation, once released from association with the human body, was no longer constrained by the tabernacle wherein the soul of the manifestation of God had chosen temporarily to abide. So he chooses to abide in this tabernacle. He chooses where he's going to become manifest. How do we know? Look what the Guardian says. In the light of this fundamental principle, it should always be borne in mind, nor can it be sufficiently emphasized, that the primary reason why the Bab and Baha'u'llah chose to appear in Persia and to make it the first repository of their revelation was because of all the peoples and nations, and those of you who are Persian may want to look away and close up your ears, of the civilized world, that race and nation had, as so often depicted by Abdul-Bahá, sunk to such ignominious depths and manifested so great a perversity as to find no parallel amongst its contemporaries. In other words, what better place to show your power to produce a spiritual civilization than among people who are unspiritual? So that's the end of part one. Part two. So part one, the manifestation and the epiphany. It's a beginning, but it's not a beginning of his state of being a manifestation. You need to know that. He chooses his temple that he's going to work through. He chooses where that temple will operate, how he can best communicate or do his job. Constructing the temple. Now, the major part of this work is not Baha'u'llah speaking. I mean, it really is. Baha'u'llah wrote it. But Baha'u'llah, if you want to think of it this way, was a creative writer. He didn't just write poetry. But sometimes he's speaking as the voice of a human being in relation to God, as a human being, sometimes as a manifestation in relation to God, sometimes as God in relation to other people, and so on. And you can tell what voice he's speaking in by the context in which he's speaking. So the first part of this work is Baha'u'llah describing what happened in the Siyah-Chál. This maiden appears before him. And remember where it's quoted in God Passes By that the maiden points a finger at his head and begins to say these wonderful things? Where are those things? They're in the Súrih Haykal. And so the entirety, once that begins, of the rest of the Súrih Haykal is the maiden speaking about the temple. And so where it says say, it's like the angel Gabriel in the Quran telling Muhammad, say. And the angel is presumably telling Muhammad, who according to some accounts would go into a trance or a seizure when he was revealing. And so that's how those around him knew that, oh, this we better take down, okay? Because this is a revelatory, and they would take down what it, and so the angel Gabriel would say this, and he would. Well, almost the entirety of this work is the angel Gabriel, the maiden, which represents the Holy Spirit, the embodiment of the Holy Spirit, telling Baha'u'llah, say this. Say this. So sometimes it is Baha'u'llah, what Baha'u'llah is going to say, and of course by writing it down, he is saying it. One of the more interesting things about the symbolic nature of it, I'm not going to get into it much here, is that paragraphs 137 through 146 of the work explain the symbolic value of the word Haykal itself. And it's kind of complicated, but this is a footnote on page 237, so if you want to know what the symbolic value of the word itself is, you read these paragraphs and then the explanatory note on 237. All right? So suffice it to say, the word Haykal has a very deep symbolic spiritual value itself. The basic symbol of the work is in this very familiar passage. It's familiar because even though the Guardian did not translate the entire work, He translated some parts of it, and they appear in Gleanings, and a couple of them in God Passes By. This is a passage that appears in Gleanings, and here is the Maiden, though we don't know that when we read it in Gleanings because there's no explanation. But you see it in the Súrih Haykal, that once the angel steps in and takes over and constructs the temple, may you have eyes like this and arms like this and so on. We'll get to that. She says, in effect, tell the people of the Bayán, nothing, naught, is seen in my temple but the temple of God. And in my beauty but his beauty, and in my being but his being, and in myself but his self, and in my movement but his movement, and in my acquiescence but his acquiescence, and in my pen but his pen, the mighty, the all-praised. Now notice this. When Baha'u'llah gives proofs of himself or the other prophets, he will use as the first proof one of two things. In the Igan, the first proof is the revelation, the fact that the prophet can reveal. This is the first proof of who he is. And of course, Muhammad and Baha'u'llah and various others say, you know, if you can do this, let's see you do it. Go ahead, reveal something. And of course, Mirza Yahya was challenged to do this, reveal something. The second proof in the Igan and the first proof in other passages is the person of the prophet himself, his own temple, his own personhood, because they are perfect, immaculate. They are, if you will, how God would be if God had to take on human form. In fact, that's precisely what the manifestations are. Godliness expressed as perfectly as it can be at a given point in human history. Let me repeat that because it's very important. The manifestations are perfect examples of godliness expressed in human form as best it can be expressed in a given point in human history. So it's no wonder then that the Christians thought that Christ must be God because he was perfect. Well, there were other reasons they thought that too, but this is true with all of the manifestations. They are seen as totally different from anything that the people have ever seen, because they are. So, in effect, this is equating the manifestation is God in symbolic expression. So the major symbol of the work is the tablet or the surah of the temple is God expressed in a physical, through a physical being. Not as seen in my temple, but the temple of God. So that's the overarching symbol for the work. This is from God Passes By, and this is the symbolism of the Maiden. So in other words, what does the Maiden symbolize? So in other words, this is a somewhat fictional event that's happening, or a vision, if you will. You can decide on your own whether it literally happened that way or whether Baha'u'llah is seeing this as a good way to explain to us the process of manifesting. In the surah, his Siyah-Chál, the Surah of the Temple, he thus describes those breathless moments when the Maiden, symbolizing the most great spirit, proclaimed his mission to the entire creation. She explained it. While engulfed in tribulations, I heard a most wondrous, a most sweet voice calling above my head. Turning my face, I beheld a maiden, the embodiment of the remembrance of the name of my Lord, suspended in the air before me. Betwixt earth and heaven she was raising a call which captivated the hearts and minds of men. And the rest of the Siyah-Chál Haykal is what she says. And what she begins with, you can see page 6, very early in the work, O people of the Bayán. So again, this is to whom the work, she is speaking most directly, to all the peoples of the world, but principally to those who are supposed to recognize him whom God will make manifest, because he's just manifested himself. O people of the Bayán, would ye deny him whose presence is the very object of your creation, while ye rejoice idly upon your couches? Would ye laugh to scorn and contend with him, a single hair of whose head excelleth in the sight of God all that are in the heavens and all that are on earth? O people of the Bayán, produce then that which ye possess, that I may know by what proof ye believed aforetime in the manifestations of his cause, and by what reason ye now wax so disdainful. Now, of course, the time the action is taking place is in the Siyah-Chál. The tablet in which this is described is in the Word Haykal, some 6 years later. All right, not 6 years later, 4 years later, 3 years later, 3 years later. I don't know, a couple of years later, all right? Now, of course, Baha'u'llah in the end of the Agan has already indicated that he is, and you'll have to help me with the pronunciation, Mustaqad, he who will be anointed, or he who will arise, Mustaqad, Mustaqad. Thank you, Babís. And that he knows of the plots that are being carried out by the one-eyed man. Who's the one-eyed man? He's not literally one-eyed. That's talking about close one eye, open the other. He's got the spiritual eye closed. To whom is that alluding in the last of the Agan, written in 1862? He's already aware of what he's doing. Nobody knows? All right. Who was the instigator behind Mirza Yahya? Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan, thank you. All the great scholars are from the Tampa community. And so he's already aware of it in 1862. Then in the letter to Nasiruddin Shah, he talks about the Maiden, and here in this, before the letter to Nasiruddin Shah, he talks about the Maiden and what she says. So she addresses the people of the Bayán. And then later on, she begins to build the temple that he will inhabit, or through which the manifestation of God will work. Does that mean she's literally doing it? Well, I'll let you figure it out. But I suspect it's a poetic device by which he says what powers and qualities and attributes that he will have to have in order to do his job. She constructs the temple. In beauteous poetic images, the Maiden addresses the temple, adorns and praises the temple, and successive sections exhorts the living temple to prepare itself for what it must endure and undertake. She exhorts the eyes of this temple not to look upon the heavens or the earth, for we have created you to behold our own beauty. She exhorts the ears of this temple not to listen to any idle clamor, but to hearken unto the voice of your Lord. In similar fashion, the maid speaks to the tongue of this temple, the feet of this temple, the breast of this temple, and the inmost heart of this temple. So this is my writing, quoting from passages, but in other words, that's in one sense the very, very heart and core of the tablet of the temple is the Maiden constructing the temple effectively, saying, this is what you must have, this is what you must endure, so on. This is a caution to all the people of the world from the Maiden. Hasten then to attain the living waters of his grace, and be not of the negligent. As to him who hesitateth, though it be for less than a moment, God shall verily bring his works to naught, and return him to the seat of wrath. Wretched indeed is the abode of them that tarry. You can see this is at the very, well, you don't know, but the thing ends on page 54. So this is the very last of the work. This is the concluding passage of the Maiden in the tablet proper. Now remember, he reveals the tablet, and then he puts it together with the 5 representative letters to the kings and rulers and has it written in the calligraphic shape of a pentacle. He adds to the tablet, at the end of those 5 successive letters, another conclusion. So this is the conclusion of the tablet originally revealed. This is spoken by the Maiden, so will the other conclusion. Take heed lest ye hesitate in recognizing this resplendent beauty when once he hath appeared in the plenitude of his sovereign might and majesty. He verily is the true one, and all else besides him as naught before a single one of his servants, and paleth into nothingness when brought face to face with the revelation of his splendors. Hasten then to attain the living waters of his grace, and be not of the negligent. As to him who hesitateth, though it be for less than a moment, God shall, oh, this is, I repeated that, didn't I? As you can see, it's still, I don't know, why is that different? Though it be for less than a moment, God shall verily bring his works to naught and return him to the seat of wrath. No, that was what was there. Sorry. I have to fix that. But see, I put this together just for you. So that's why it's kind of rough. This is the conclusion of the whole thing, after he's repeated the letters that he sent to those 5 dignitaries. And this is the Maiden still speaking, I infer. Thus have we built the temple with the hands of power and might, could ye but know it. This is the temple promised unto you in the book. Now the Guardian says, and I don't know if you remember, but I read this earlier, the Guardian says this Baha'u'llah added because it's referring to the book. Which book? Well, we know from the Quran that when Muhammad says the people of the book, he's referring to what book? Pardon? All of the scriptures are utterances of the manifestations of the past. The people of the book are those who have followed God through whatever manifestation they had at the time. And so the people of the book, here he is, though, you're right, Adi, he's referring to the Old Testament prophecies about the building of the temple. And the Guardian points out which ones those are. Draw ye nigh unto it. This is that which profiteth you, could ye but comprehend it. Be fair, O peoples of the earth, which is preferable, this or a temple which is built of clay? Set your faces towards it. Thus have ye been commanded by God to help in peril the self-subsisting. Follow you his bidding, and praise ye God, your Lord, for that which he hath bestowed upon you. He verily is the truth. No God is there but he. He revealeth what he pleaseth, though his words be, and it through his words be, and it is. Yah. Okay. Now, the final section, and this is where we get to the heart of the talk. How does this have anything to do with clusters? Because the body, as we said, is also a symbol of the institution established by Baha'u'llah, and in the case of Baha'u'llah, secured by the links in the covenant. So I took a passage from The Priceless Pearl by Rahia Khanum, because it's very beautiful, in which she says that the administrative institutions may be likened to the veins and arteries of the body that carry in their network the vital flow of Baha'u'llah's teachings to all parts of the world, through their instrumentality, a recreated society. That Christ promised kingdom, that world order whose generative impulse is none other than Baha'u'llah himself, whose dominion is the entire planet, whose watchword is unity, whose animating power is the force of justice, whose directive purpose is the reign of righteousness and truth, and whose supreme glory is the complete, the undisturbed, and everlasting felicity of the whole of humankind, can be brought into being. And so the same with Christianity, as we said at the beginning. When Christ goes through this symbolic act of the Eucharist, here is this bread, it is my body. It is understood symbolically that the body of Christ represents the institution he leaves behind. So, God says, be, and it is. Kun fayakuno. And the thing is, God doesn't just say, be, and it is, and it is. It is in the world of the Spirit, it already exists, but in the material world, it has to be pieced together. And so you have the divine will wishing it to be, but you have to translate the Holy Spirit emanating from that wish into increments of a process of action. And that's the purpose of these temples, of these human representatives. They teach us how to take this and translate it into this. So one way of looking at it metaphorically is this. You have from the celestial realm of God, the Holy Spirit emanating latent with that wish, the manifestation like a prism is the temple that reflects that pure, invisible white light into perceptible attributes, powers, and strategies. So we can't see this, the manifestation can, but we can, by seeing the manifestation, understand them as they are manifested and as he explains to us a path, a way of life that will enable us to create. The top-down view of the same process goes like this. You have the spiritual realm, the realm of the physical creation, and then you have the translation of that spirit into physical reality by means of these intermediaries who are come in the form of human temples, the Bab and Baha'u'llah, and if you squint your eyes, you see that that's what the symbolism is taking place here. The twin branches of this institution seemed very simple for about the last half century as we built and refined the local spiritual assembly, the national spiritual assemblies, elected the houses of justice. And these people over here did whatever they did, and we didn't pay much attention to it, unless we got in trouble and they came to visit us or something like that. But basically, like the hands of the cause, they diffused the fragrances and looked after any problem situations. Now, a change has occurred, because Baha'u'llah created not a static system, because by definition, according to Abdul-Bahá, a religion that is static is what? Dead. Because everything in creation is evolving, changing, growing. If it is not, it will die. All right? Now, this is one of the more beautiful poems that the Guardian wrote, even though it's in a prose form. So listen to it carefully, because he's talking about Baha'u'llah in terms of beautiful poetic metaphor. Not ours, the living witnesses of the all-subduing potency of his faith, to question for a moment, and however dark the misery that enshrouds the world, the ability of Baha'u'llah to forge with the hammer of his will, and through the fire of tribulation, upon the anvil of this travailing age, and in the particular shape his mind has envisioned. He is the creator of his own edifice. These scattered and mutually destructive fragments into which a perverse world has fallen, into one single unit, solid, indivisible, able to execute it, his design for the children of men. So he's forging with the hammer of his will, through the fire of tribulation, upon the anvil of his will, the fragments of our perverse world into one coordinated, coherent, a word you're going to hear more and more, collaborative structure that's evolving, a design for the children of men. We are those children. And so if you think of it in these terms, you've got the travailing age, which is the anvil. You've got the fire of tribulation heating up the metal objects, the will of Baha'u'llah, the vision he has, the particular shape his mind has envisioned from scattered and mutually destructive fragments. This brings us then to the present day, and that is the links in the construction of the body of the cause, or the temple that is the body of Baha'u'llah. Let me see that again. We have the securing of the covenant by virtue of the fact that we have at every link in the progressive unfoldment of the body of the cause of the Baha'i faith documents confirming the powers and authority of each one of these figures. Abdul-Bahá as center of the covenant, Shoghi Effendi as guardian of the covenant, the hands of the cause and their function under the guardianship, and finally the universal house of justice, its parameters of its authority. And so we'll turn to the universal house of justice, since that is the body under which we have been covenanted to follow as the present supreme institution of the temple or body that Baha'u'llah has constructed. And so we look at these two critical passages in the will and testament of Abdul-Bahá, which say that they are the source of all good, freed from all error, infallible. That that everything they decide has the same effect as the text. Notice text is capitalized. Give me a synonym for text. What is text referring to? The Word of God. Pardon? Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit, the book. All right. But in particular, it's referring to the authoritative text of the Baha'i faith, whether they emanate from Baha'u'llah, from Shoghi Effendi, from Abdul-Bahá, or from the Universal House of Justice. The same effect, no difference. I'm sorry? It goes all the way to God. Absolutely, absolutely. Plans as infallible blueprints for construction. Now, this is where we get to the present and why this is so important. We go all the way from Baha'u'llah as the temple to through his institution secured by his own design, the blueprints for the construction of this body. And the blueprints, of course, aren't static. The blueprints call for a design that is infinitely and immanently flexible and capable of growth. Not only capable of growth, but necessarily in a stage of growth. So we have these successive plans. From the guardian, 3 plans. From the house of justice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's where we are right now, 9th plan. And then we know that the next 2 5-year plans will take us up to the end of the 1st century of the formative age of the Baha'i faith under the guidance of the divine plan of Abdul-Bahá. So up till 2021. Right now we're here. All of these plans are valuable, but they're history. And so they're not, in other words, it's interesting to study them and see what the goals were and so on, but we are right now under the guidance, the authoritative guidance of this plan right here. And so that's where we must look for what our present guidance is in the construction of this body that is the temple of Baha'u'llah. So, In 1996, the Baha'i faith looked as it had since I became a Baha'i in 1959. But then the House of Justice started adding some things. Well, the auxiliary board members were already there, but they were given a new function. Suddenly they were active in the community, telling us things to do. We weren't used to that, so we cussed at them. And then APC, and well, here, we'll give it another look. All of these, with a few exceptions, such as NSAs and LSAs, are institutions or agencies that have been created in the last 10 years. All right? A few of them, like the institutes, the regional training institutes, were created during the 4-year plan. All right? But we didn't really know what they were about at that time, what their future destiny was. Now we do. So now we have all of this, but even that is changing. Every IPG, every cycle. So we went from that sort of staid thing that we were used to something like this, a cluster. What's a cluster? Well, a cluster is an area designed by or designated by design of communities that have some related interest, whether culturally or economically, and they may have LSAs and isolated believers and non-Baha'is and registered groups, all right? And governing or guiding that cluster are cluster agencies that are formed from members of registered groups or LSAs, isolated believers, and it's constructed or guided by this core team, which is the ABM and the ABM's assistants and the Cluster Institute Coordinator and the Area Teaching Committee, in particular the Area Teaching Committee Secretary, who sort of heads up the ATC in its consultation. So these 3 basic components are the cluster agencies, though they're collaborating with and coordinated with all the other institutions that retain all the functions they had before. So if you tried to see, well, wait a minute, this looks pretty linear and pretty like the regional council, which I'm on, oversees the cluster, and it oversees the board that oversees the institute. But if you look at the whole thing in terms of collaboration and communication and administration, and that's just a little of it, that's not the whole thing. So, and basically you're going from this basic framework to something more like this that's getting more to look like a complete human being, so that the body of the cause is becoming more representative of the temple that Baha'u'llah envisioned. Now, of course, that will change ad infinitum. So the conclusion is this: the present 5-year plan will be followed by 2 more 5-year plans whose objectives and strategies and practices will become ever more refined. The rapidity of that advancement is dependent on the degree to which all institutions and agencies collaborate to strengthen clusters throughout the world. Therefore, it is imperative that all institutions, especially the LSAs, from which come the majority of your resources, understand their part in collaborating with the other cluster agencies to create the framework for action that will resurrect and reanimate the global body politic. And so in conclusion, I would like the cluster agencies that are represented here to be recognized. We have Trish Irons, if you would stand up, please, Trish, is the ABM. And if you would point out your assistants, if some of them are here. Stand up, Ingrid. And okay, your ATC, Beverly, Azizi. Fariba, I don't see. All right. Well, I'm sure most of you are familiar with who your representatives of your own cluster are. So support them, help them, be a human resource, help to do this work and continue building this framework that is spread throughout the world. It's very interesting that you could leave here, and I envision within a year or two, you could probably leave here at the beginning of your expansion phase of an IPG and fly to Madrid and participate in their expansion phase of their IPG, because all of this is being coordinated into quarterly cycles throughout the world, where we're all not doing exactly the same thing, but we're using the same structures and strategies and learning from one another and changing it as we need to. So it's quite a lot of change in the body of this cause. All right, thank you. Now you can clap. And any questions? Yes.
On the twin institutions of faith, some controversial cases going on, the guardianship, for example.
The guardianship what?
Who is playing that role now?
Okay, very good question. Who is playing the role of the guardian? As you see here, you've got the two capacities of, let me go back. Oh, wait a minute, I'm going the wrong way. No, I'm really going the wrong way. I don't know what I'm doing now. Can I actually make this thing do something? I don't know. Here, I'll get it, Jeremiah. Sorry, folks. Okay. These two exhortations to know and to worship are the two pillars of our faith. With the manifestations, they serve both purposes. They are both the source of the new revelation and the source of the new law. With Abdul-Bahá, the same thing was true. He was both the authorized interpreter and he was the exemplar of what to do. He also had the capacity to legislate. The guardian did not have both capacities, and so after Abdul-Bahá, it becomes divided. The source of the learning was the guardian, and the source of legislation was the House of Justice. But as the House of Justice has pointed out, each had to work without the other. But now that the edifice is completed, they don't. So while there is no individual functioning as guardian, the House of Justice, before it decides on a matter, refers to all of the interpretations and commentaries of the guardian on any given matter. And it's not confined to the literally hundreds and thousands of works that the guardian did in commentary. Remember that everything the guardian translated is effectively also an interpretation. Now that's my statement, that's not from the House of Justice or something, but it is. I know that because I'm translating some stuff now and I can see where the guardian, in other words, when the House of Justice wants to know what is said by Baha'u'llah on the subject, they don't go to the original text. They go to the Guardian's translation of that text, because in translating it, he also interpreted it, and in other words, showed through the greater repository of synonyms and so on you have in English, the exact meaning that Baha'u'llah was getting at. So you still have these, they're called the twin institutions, and they're still the twin institutions. So in effect, the House of Justice still has the advice of the guardianship, okay? Anything else? No?
I have a question. You refer to immaculacy. Whether immaculacy ends with the manifestation, or what's the difference between that and infallibility? Whether the Universal House of Justice is omniscient at will, so it cannot be immaculate?
All right. That's a complex question, but let me see if we can break it down into parts. First of all, the House of Justice says that, like the guardian, it was not omniscient. And therefore, like the guardian, for it to make proper decisions, it needs proper information. So the decisions it makes are without error based on the information they are given. However, they have the authority to correct, to change a decision, and so on. All right? So the guardian said that he says that the manifestations are omniscient at will. The guardian said that he was not, and the House of Justice, of course, is not omniscient. So there's a difference between infallibility and omniscience. Omniscient means you inherently know stuff. Infallible means you don't make mistakes. Second part of that, immaculacy versus infallibility. Only the manifestation partakes of what is called the most great infallibility. It means from the beginning of his beginning, which has no beginning, he is infallible. He is inherently infallible. If you look in that same passage in Some Answered Questions, Abdul-Bahá goes on to say that they know everything from birth. In other words, as soon as they have consciousness, they are aware of everything. Because unlike us, and this is where it gets really interesting, and I wish I had time to look up the passage. Abdul-Bahá says, we have a knowledge of our body. It's a gift, because our spirit surrounds our body. The manifestations inherently have a knowledge of reality itself, because their spirit surrounds the whole of reality. And you can, obviously that's not meant to be in a physical paradigm, but it's still, it's there, you can read it and decide what you think it means. So the manifestation, Abdul-Bahá goes on to say, they alone partake of inherent infallibility. They know everything from the beginning. They don't make any errors. Abdul-Bahá had conferred infallibility, meaning that the manifestation has the authority to confer infallibility on another being or an institution. We presume, or at least some people do, I do, that this was conferred on Ali by Muhammad. Okay, and the Imams, and this is something you can infer from what the Guardian says, that that's how it was supposed to go. Muhammad, in the tradition of the two gifts, said, I leave you two things. I leave you the Quran and my family. And of course, the family was diverted from being able to succeed in the body of his covenant. So, getting back to your question then, the word immaculate and infallible are sometimes were sometimes confused, and on earlier translations of Some Answered Questions, the word immaculate was used instead of infallible. Both terms are applicable. They are immaculate in the sense they are without sin. They are sinless. They are perfect beings. But they're also infallible. So, regardless of how you interpret it, both are equally applicable. Abdul-Bahá, the Guardian says, was unique in the annals of world history, at least on this planet, this world, because he was an immaculate being. and he was an ordinary human being, not a manifestation. However, you'll find another interesting comment, and that is in the writings it says, once in an age or once every age, certain perfect men will appear, usually prior to the appearance of a manifestation. What that means, I don't know. You can figure it out for yourself. But if you'll look up on Ocean, perfect man. It's a phrase used by Rumi and the Sufis, but it's also used in the Baha'i writings. Does that kind of get at what you're talking about? Okay. Any other questions at all? Yes.
Earlier, quoting, you said something that for people of Bayán was said derisively.
Mm-hmm.
I squirmed when you said that.
A what?
I squirmed a little bit when you said that.
You swore?
Squirmed.
Squirmed.
No, I didn't swear.
You squirmed?
Squirmed, yes. A manifestation of God saying that of his own people, trying to follow what they believe to be God's word.
What he's talking, he doesn't use that term, and I said he was using it derisively. He didn't say it was used derisively. According to Kamran, he doesn't use it derisively. You go look at it and you decide if he's using it derisively. The point is this: he doesn't use the term until after he has professed his own station. As the Bab said, if you are following me after the appearance of him whom God will make manifest, you're no longer following me. Because I'm telling you, follow him. And so people of the Bayán, especially in the later tablets, he seems to be using it in if not derisive or condescending, at least retributive, or you decide what adjective is applicable or if any of them are applicable. That's just my feeling. All right, that you're still following the Bayán. I'm here, but again, that's not from the writings. That's just my feeling when I see the term used, especially in this tablet and later tablets. So I may be absolutely wrong. Okay. Anything else before we go have dessert and cookies? Yes. Who wants to be called that?
People that are still believers of the Bayán and the Azal.
Oh, I doubt I doubt very seriously that we would be encouraged to speak derisively to anyone of any religious faith. All right? I'm talking about the manifestation. You read his works, you decide what the tone is according to what you infer. Yes? The Bayán, there's two Bayáns. There's the Persian Bayán and the Arabic Bayán, the Arabic. The Persian Bayán is the most holy book of the Bab. It is the repository of his laws, which were very elaborate and very exacting. And so it is the followers of the Bayán were the followers of the laws of the Bab. We have, of course, many of the work. There's a recent work come out by Nadir Saidi, The Gate of the Heart, which is a very good overall overview of the incredible vast repository of the Bab's works, how many they were, what subjects they covered. And until you look at that, you're just astounded that in the course of such a few years, he could write so many works, knowing, as he has foreknowledge, that they will never be disseminated. And so I have a theory, and it's mine and what it is too. And my theory is this. I feel that because some of these works are still available, and we only have one book that is a collection of some of the, the selections from the writings of the Bab, which has bits of the Bayán and so on. But the main focus of the writings of the Bab is to the Muslims, commenting on various surah of the Quran. Of course, the first thing he reveals is the commentary on the surah of Joseph to Mullah Hussein. And Joseph in that is emblematic of Baha'u'llah. But if you'll notice the list of works listed in the books, in Sa'idi's book, many of them are commentaries on the very obscure surah of the Quran. In other words, these would be, to any scholar of the Quran, incredibly convincing arguments, but they were never disseminated. Now, what is the only, in addition to us, coherent force, politically or any otherwise, in the world today, other than capitalism? Monolithic capitalism. What other force seems to be having sway in the world? Fanatical or pan-Islamic movements, which truly believes, that it is the mandate that Islam be the last religion and the only complete religion of God that should encompass the world. What if, by the time that they reach whatever heights or depths they ascend or descend to, some of the works of the Bab were sufficiently translated, or they don't have to be translated after all, because some of them in Arabic. They now have access to those works, and that all of that work the Bab did will not have been in vain after all, but will have, it's a thought. It's a thought. It's a pretty cute thought, isn't it? No, cute isn't the right word. Anything else then? Okay, thank you.